so number 18. So we're on our list of the most influential post-apostolic books. So this does not include books of the New Testament. I was not going to rank the Gospel of John against evidence that demands a verdict or mere Christianity. So Martin Luther writes this book called The Commentary of Romans. And I've said this, some of you have heard me say this before, but not all of you, so I shall repeat it. That a lot of people think that the most important document Luther wrote was his 95 Theses that he tacked to the door of Wittenberg Castle on October 31st, 1517. And while that was a very important moment in the history of Christianity and a very important moment in the history of Protestantism, that document could be better be named or renamed the 95 things that tick Martin Luther off about the Catholic Church. So I would not really call it a foundational document for what would later become Protestantism. And as I say here, the posting of the 95 Theses is often considered to be the start of the Protestant Reformation. At the time that he did it, it was the equivalent of posting something on a blog or on Facebook or on a website. So the idea of tacking something up on the castle door, other professors did that too. And then the idea was to get a dialogue going. Well, the problem, or if you're Protestant, you wouldn't call it a problem. The issue with Luther doing it and then posting the 95 things that really ticked me off about the Roman Catholic Church is they had a thing back then called the printing press. And people took his 95 Theses and they started printing them and distributing them all over Germany and then all over Holland and then all over Europe, and people translated them, and then suddenly you have a movement when in fact all he had meant to do was to show how annoyed he was about certain things. But the 95 Theses, while they do contain things like you shouldn't have to pay for indulgences and etc., they do not contain the basic elements of Protestantism. However, Luther did write a book that contained the basic elements of Protestantism, and it is called, well actually there's two of them, which we kind of take together. If you want to see the beginnings of the core Protestant theology, Luther wrote two books, one called The Commentary on Romans, and another called the Preface to the Epistle to the Romans. And the preface is kind of a paraphrase, overview, so a cliff notes, I guess is the best way to put it. But the Commentary on Romans is a verse-by-verse commentary on Paul's wonderful letter to the Romans. And it contains all the basic elements of what today we call Protestantism. It has, salvation by faith and not works. It has the fact that we're all crummy, and the only way we can get linked back to a perfect God is through a bridge called Jesus Christ. It has all kinds of predestination stuff in it. Luther actually said that if a leaf, pretend this is a leaf, I know it's a pen, but pretend it's a leaf. If a leaf falls from a tree, then God had preordained that that leaf was going to fall from the tree. Even Calvin didn't go that far. So it has kind of the basic elements of the early Protestant Reformation. He writes it in 1515, 1516, while he's a professor of biblical literature at Wittenberg University. So he's Dr. Luther at that point, and he has a group of eager college students, and he's teaching classes to them. And he writes this wonderful commentary. You'll notice that he wrote this commentary before he posted the 95 Theses. So if anybody wanted to read it, what was going to be the explosion that was going to happen 2 or 3 years later, it was waiting there to see. He had already written this commentary. And by the way, I do have a course on where I do a look at the book of Romans, the epistle to the Romans, and I use Calvin's commentary and Luther's commentary as my main sources when in describing it. My favorite point of Luther's commentary on Romans couple verses that you read that Paul wrote, and no one who's ever read it has any idea what he's talking about. No one. I challenge you. And I thought, well, I got to see what Luther says this means. I go down, and Luther says, I have no idea what the apostle means by these. And that was it. That was his commentary on those verses. It was wonderful.
Which verses are those?
I'll pull them out for next week. It just hit me now. I didn't have time to do the hours and hours of preparation because of the wedding.
Goodness.
So, as I said, if you look into the you see justification by faith, you have salvation by the grace of God, you have the Bible as a sole authority, you have predestination, you have the rejection of salvation by works. It's all there. And I have a few examples, so we'll look at those now. The righteousness of God is the cause of our salvation. Not anything we do, it's the righteousness of God. This righteousness, however, is not that according to which God himself is righteous as God. I mean, that's a given. But that by which we are justified by him through faith in the gospel. It is called the righteousness of God with contradistinction. There's a word that doesn't get used anymore. We just say distinction.
It sounds like bushes.
But I love it. I use contradistinction.
It's like misunderestimated.
Yeah. In contradistinction to man's righteousness, which comes from works. Righteousness or justification precedes works, and good works grow out of it. That's about as basic Protestantism as you can have. We're saved because of the righteousness of God and through our faith in the gospel. We're not saved through what? Works. Now, because we're saved, eventually we're going to do good works. But doing good works is not how we get saved. Doing good works is something that happens as a result of
we behave because we believe. We don't believe because we behave.
Right. Predestination. Now, I realize some of you may not believe in predestination. I understand that. I'm not putting this up here and saying this is the only path. However, all the early reformers absolutely recognize there's no chance. It is only men who speak of chance. I love that. I think that's brilliant. Not a single leaf falls from the tree without the will of the Father. All things are essentially in his hands, and so are also our times. Isn't that wonderful? Whether you agree with it or not, isn't the wording majestic? I realize if I was an Armenian, I probably wouldn't think the wording was... The first and most flimsy objection against the divine election is this, that man has been given free will by which he can earn for himself either merit or demerit. To this I reply, man's free will without divine grace has not the least ability to secure righteousness, but is totally corrupt. So why is Luther against the idea of free will? Because to him it smacks of salvation by works. You have made the decision. Good works come from being saved, not the other way around. God does not accept the person on account of his works, but he accepts the works on account of the believing person. He first accepts the person who believes in him, and then the works flowing from faith. The former, the work righteous, finally regard themselves no longer as sinners. The latter, the believers, always acknowledge themselves to be sinners. Isn't that wonderful? That's another misconception you see in the press all the time. No, Christians think they're perfect.
No.
Christians think we're miserable sinners. It's just we feel we've been forgiven.